Thanks for leading us, man. I'm grateful. If you are new to Redeemer Georgetown and we haven't met, my name is Brandon Barker. I am a happy member here at Redeemer Georgetown. Vocationally, I get to serve the Redeemer Network, which is the org we get our namesake from, Redeemer Georgetown. We, at our heart, at our core, we want to train pastors to start and revitalize healthy churches. So as a church here at Redeemer Georgetown, we've been going through a series in the book of Exodus. We've been kind of going week by week, walking through the story of Exodus and seeing how the story of Israel being in bondage, enslaved to Egypt, being delivered, how this story unfolds into the story of Jesus. And today, we hit a passage that it's actually a really well-known passage in leadership circles. In fact, that's really almost universally how I've heard this passage taught, that it's about leadership and delegation and empowerment, where Moses' father-in-law comes in. He's teaching Moses about these leadership principles, and I think that is a real point in the text, actually. But I think it's secondary. I think it's a secondary point to the primary point. I think the primary point of the text is about judgment. Some Moses sitting around and judging right, wrong, good, bad, holy, unholy, laying out these verdicts between two people. And so let's talk about judgment. Put a smile on your face, people. Here we go. If I said to you guys, raise your hand if you've ever said this. I love feeling judged. Exactly. No one's raising that hand. No one's sitting here going, when I feel like you're looking at me and you are judging me just for being me, I love the way that feels. No one in this room. Have you seen those commercials, the He Gets Us commercials? Y'all familiar with that? You seen it? I've noticed on the last couple of times I've seen these He Gets Us. It's about Jesus getting us. I don't know anything about what's behind it, but I saw this. He Gets Us / no judgment. No judgment. If we were going to Boo Bash later, and we're not because it's canceled via the weather, and we held up signs that said, hey, listen, come to Redeemer Georgetown. We love judging people. That is not going to grow the church. That is not a strategic approach to growing your church. And here's why. I want to give you two cultural views on judgment. Here's the first one. One, it's almost universally seen as harmful. It's generally seen as harmful, or it's seen like this. It's seen as a problem with you. Right, so if you're judging somebody else, it's because you're insecure, you fill in the blank, you've got your own daddy issues, your mommy issues, and those are coming out in the way that you judge other people. So it's seen as harmful. This is almost universal. Or two, it's seen as something you don't have the right to do. So if we interview 100 people on the streets, Georgetownians, is that the right saying for where we live? Georgetownian? Is that right? Close enough. Y'all know who I'm talking about. And we ask them, do you think judging one another is just something that we have the right to do? I'm guessing overwhelming majority are going to say no, but here's what I want y'all to see. Both judgment is harmful and judgment is something you don't have the right to do are both judgment statements on judgments. Does that make sense? When you say either one of those statements, you are making a judgment about judgments. And here's the point. It's an unavoidable and inescapable reality. Brené Brown, sociologist, I actually think she does some really good work on diagnosing emotional stuff. I don't think a lot in the way of solutions, but a lot in the way of helpful diagnosis. If you know who she is, that means something. If you don't, I apologize for that little sidebar. But she says this. Judgment is just part of the human experience. To try to be perfect to avoid judgment is a terrible waste of time. Judgment is inescapable. It is an unavoidable reality in the human experience. It is just part of the world, and because it is inescapable, Exodus 18, and Moses sitting around casting judgment one for the other, I think has something to say to us. And I want to look at this text like this. I want to answer three questions. One, why was he judging? Two, how was he judging? And three, what was the purpose of his judgment? All right, so why was he judging? How? And then what was the purpose? All right, so let's start with why. Why was he judging? Look at verses 13 and 16. The next day, Moses sat to judge the people. And the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. Now this is a full day. This is Moses sitting around and people sitting around all day and him casting judgment, right, wrong, good, bad. And then look at verse 16. When they have a dispute, they come to me and I decide between one person and another. I make them know the statutes of God and his laws. And so the scene is this. Moses sitting around, people coming to him, spending all day bringing their cases, their disputes, their disagreements. The word dispute, it's an interesting word to actually be here. The Hebrew word, it means speech. It's this picture of arguments. We don't agree. We don't see eye to eye. We're not aligned on this. We're coming to Moses and we're asking Moses for help. And it's kind of a courtroom scene. Right, where he's, as the arbiter, as the judge, they're sitting around and he's hearing their case, hearing their disagreement, he's saying, I'm judging you or not for you. Now, in this scene, there's actually a positive and a negative side to this. And so let's talk positive first. Here's the positive side. They seem to be handling it in a pretty mature manner. From what we can see in the text, we have people who don't agree. They're arguing. They have these serious and real disputes, but they're not going to blows over it. Right? It's not turning violent. They're coming to Moses and saying, Moses, what do you think that we should do? Now, every parent in the room knows this. That's not natural. That is not natural. Here's what 4, and 5, and 6-year-olds don't do. They don't sit around, they don't disagree, and they maturely say, hey, listen, brother, hey, listen, sister, we're just not going to see eye to eye. I think mom and dad have some wisdom that we don't have. Let's go chat with mom and dad and see what they think about that, and then that will be how we settle this. Said no 4 or 5, 6-year-old ever. What do? They blow up at one another. They start screaming, they slam doors. In fact, true story, our new house, 4, 5, 6 months old, I don't know how long we lived there, it's got a hole in the wall to prove it. Now we have a little plastic thing we bought from a store to cover it up so you can't see it, but it's there. This is not how children or how natural people handle their disputes. But here's the thing. Mature handling conflict. Handling conflict in a mature manner, it's actually a sign of health. We had a panel discussion at the Redeemer Conference that we held not long ago. I moderated this discussion. And we had a lady named Leanne Lagasse, who she's brilliant. We did the pre-call with her, and it was like the two guys and her, and it was like, hey, you're educated, sharp, and she was like the expert and brilliant. What she does professionally, she goes into corporate teams, executive teams, and she walks in and she navigates them, helps lead them through conflict. And this is what she said. She said the worst functioning teams are the ones without any conflict. So the healthiest, most productive, thriving teams are the teams that have conflict and they handle it in a healthy manner. And this is true not just for teams and corporations and companies. So we know this from our families, don't we? Right? How many of us grew up in a home, and don't raise your hand, that's not why I said that. But how many of us grew up in a home like this that are living with scars from this? We just kind of swept everything under the rug. Or maybe we didn't sweep it under the rug and we just blew up on one another. I'm guessing that resonates with more than one or two of you in the room who are trying to navigate adult life in light of your childhood years and how you handled conflict. How did that lead to health? Absolutely not. You know, that was a sign of dysfunction and unhealth. Marriages, right? If we just hold it in until we blow, that's not a sign of health. That's a sign of unhealth. Or maybe this one, churches. A church without conflict is a church without depth. So here's your assignment for Gospel Community this week. 3 arguments, minimum. Here's the point. Conflict handled in a mature manner is almost always a sign of health. There's a negative to this. The negative is this one, that conflict is just simply something that we cannot escape. It's not something we can escape. Now, every commentator I could find looks at this chapter 18, and they see it as a bit of a bridge from chapter 17 to chapter 19. Chapter 19, Israel gets to Sinai, where they're going to get the Ten Commandments. Chapter 17, we just got attacked, went to battle. We just went to war. Now, when you think about countries who have just been attacked and just gone to battle, what usually follows war and battle? A time of peace. Think America post 9/11. Right, there was a season, it didn't last long, but there was a season post 9/11 where extreme right, extreme left, they didn't matter. We just came together. Like, right, when George Bush stood on the mound at Yankee Stadium and threw out the first pitch. Do you guys remember that? No? Oh man, am I dating myself right now? Nobody in that moment went, not my president. We just been attacked. There was a season of unity here. If there was ever going to be a time for peace in the nation of Israel, among the people of Israel, it's this. We've just been attacked. And now we're on the move to Sinai. This should be a season of national healing, not healing necessarily, but peace. And it's not. It's a season of conflict. Why? Because when we trace the story of the Bible from Genesis 3 on, here's how it goes. This is not all of them. This is just a few that I scratched down. Here's the story of the Bible from Genesis 3. That's where sin enters the world until here. Cain and Abel, brother killing brother. Noah in the flood, blotting out the wicked. Jacob and Esau in that banana crazy story. Joseph and his brothers selling him into slavery. Israel enslaved in Egypt. Moses and Pharaoh, right to the battle last week. And I didn't talk about Genesis 6 because I have no idea what to do with that, or others. The story of humanity at this point is a story of conflict. It's a story of conflict. And the reason it's a story of conflict is the source of conflict, it runs deep. It runs deep. When Genesis 3 happened and sin enters the world and there's this crack between God and between man and man, conflict is all that could follow. It was immediate and it was ongoing. And it runs deep. It's why the source of your conflict is almost always, I would say always, but I'm sure somebody would come up with some hypothetical where it's, all right, not always. So I'll say almost universally under the surface. Almost universally under the surface. So, for example, in your marriage or at work, we are having issues with communication. We struggle with communication. That is almost never the problem. That's almost always the symptom of the problem. The real problem sits underneath that. It's underneath the surface. Let me give you a real life example. So I work for Redeemer Network now. Before this, I pastored a church in Houston for 7 years, and it was just rough. It was relationally, it was rough. Our staff, we had a lot of tension. It wasn't healthy. I was our lead pastor. I am responsible. I'm not passing the buck to anybody. But here's why. We had a real communication problem, and here's what it was. We had conflict that we needed to talk about, and we weren't talking about it. Why were we not? So that's our communication problem. We need to be talking about this conflict, but we are not talking about it. Why are we not talking about it? Well, it's because I bought a lie. I bought into a lie. Here was the lie that I bought. That the presence of conflict equaled a failure of leadership. Why does that matter? Because feeling like a failure is my single greatest fear in life. We had a communication problem, but that was just a symptom of a problem beneath a problem. The real problem was I was afraid of feeling like a failure. And when we look at our marriages or our children or our workplace, we might look at it and go, man, I'm struggling with communication, but that's almost always the symptom. The real issue is layers deep beneath that. Why? Because the source of conflict, then and now, it runs deep. And so why did Moses have to sit around judging all day? Judging between right and wrong? It's because the source of conflict and the brokenness of the world, it runs deep inside the human soul. It runs deep. And because it does, conflict is inescapable and unavoidable reality. That's why. Question 2. How was he judging? How was Moses judging? We're going to see two things. One, he was teaching. Two, he was mediating. So let's look at teaching first. Look at verses 15 and 16 with me. Verse 15 and 16. And Moses said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God, and when they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make them know the statutes of God and his laws. Okay. When it says they come to me to inquire of God, this is actually a Hebrew phrase that later is going to be translated often. It's thought of as like seeking God in prayer, coming and seeking God in prayer, and so they're coming to inquire. And here's a really positive side to this. The picture we get is not of them coming and saying, hey, Moses, what do you think? But coming to Moses and say, what do you think God would say to this? What does God think about this? And so here's what Moses is doing. He's making them know, it's teaching the statutes and the laws of God. He is taking the mind of God and applying it to their disagreements. This was a teaching ministry for Moses. He was taking what was known, applying it to them. And underneath this, here's what we see. We see that God judges between right and wrong, good and bad, holy and unholy. But we have a God of judgment. And I know that for some, you hear that and go, no, if I believe in God, but I believe in a God of love, not a God of judgment. And I want you to know you can't have one without the other. You can't have a God of love without a God of judgment. Let me give you an illustration. My family were Polish Jews on my mom's side who came through Ellis in the 30s to Portland, Maine, to Nebraska, to Houston, and now Georgetown. That part of the family got out just before Hitler got there. Presumably we have family who were left behind who didn't get out. We don't actually know. We can't trace it back that far. But to the Polish Jews more broadly, you can't have a God of love toward them without a God of judgment towards Hitler. You can't have one without the other. You have to have a God of love. Judgment, to have a God of love. Or more practically for some, if you just say, listen, when I think of God who just accepts me as I am. What you're saying is that I want a God who doesn't challenge me, who doesn't correct me, who doesn't push back on any part of my life. And if that's you, here's what you have. You don't have a God, you have yourself. You fashioned a God after your own image. So you don't have God, you have yourself, just reinforcing yourself in the name of God. So the first thing Moses was doing was he was teaching. He was taking the statutes, laws of God, applying it. The second thing he was doing was mediating. Look at verse 19 and 20. This is Moses' father-in-law. He says, now obey my voice, and I will give you advice, and God will be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. And you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. So represent people before God. Here's one commentator looked at that phrase, and this is the way they said it. It said Jethro, that's the father-in-law, understands Moses to be the mediator between God and people. So they come to Moses, Moses goes to God, Moses comes back from God to the people, settles things right and wrong. A mediator brings agreement, alignment between two parties. And so Moses is sitting there bridging the gap between people, God, applying what God has said to their disagreements, their disputes. And I want you to see the goal of both, teaching and mediating. It was, at the end of verse 20, that they would know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. That the goal wasn't simply to know what God has said, it was to do. It was to both know and to do. It was to bring alignment between the mind and the heart of God and the life of the people. And I think there's actually a warning here for us. And the warning is this. That this is the goal of teaching from beginning to end in the Bible. The goal of teaching from beginning to end in the Bible is not simply to know for the sake of knowing, but it's to know so that you would do. Think about Jesus in what we call the Great Commission at the end of Matthew 28. What does he say? He says, teach to observe all that I have commanded. Baptize and teach. Teaching what? To observe all that I have commanded. James 1:22, be doers of the word, not hearers only, deceiving yourself. That to hear only and not to do is to deceive yourself into, I think, into believing that you actually believe what you're hearing. So Moses is teaching and he's mediating. That's how he's judging. He's not sitting there coming up with what he thinks. He's going and taking what God has said and then applying it to their disputes, to their disagreements, which takes us to the third question. What was its purpose? What was the purpose of Moses' judgment? Why did he do it? To answer that, we need to see what mattered most to Moses' father-in-law. Look at verse 17 and 18. So Moses' father-in-law said to him, what you're doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone. And so, here's Moses' father-in-law, and this is where the leadership principles show up, legitimately show up. He shows up and says, listen, what you're doing, it's not good. You can't do this alone. You're going to wear yourself out. It is legitimate to look at this and go, hey, listen, there's some delegation needs to happen. Like, Robert, our pastor, needs to look at this and go, I need to apply this. Like, I need to build teams and delegate. Like, we should be sharing the load among one another. That is a legitimate point here, but I want you to see this. At this point in the Bible, at this point here in Exodus 18, the word good, it's a theological term at this point. If we trace it early on, here's what we're going to see. God looked at creation and he said what? It was good. Looked at man and said it's very good. And looked at Adam before there was an Eve and said it's not what? Good. That the man should be alone. Satan looked and said to Adam and Eve, listen, if you eat, you'll be like God, knowing what? Good and evil. Eve looked at the tree and saw that it was good, and she ate. If we go to the end of Genesis, Joseph, looking back, says what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Here's the point. Good, it means order. It means harmony. It means rhythm. It means redemption. What is not good means chaos, disorder, dysfunction. And what Jethro is saying here is that process matters. The process matters. The process in making these decisions, these judgments, it matters. And this process, Moses, is not good. It is not going to lead to order and harmony and rhythm and beauty in your life or in the people. It will lead to chaos and disorder in you, Moses, and in them. So process matters, but so do the people. So do the people making decisions. Look at verse 21 and 22. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy, who hate a bribe. And place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of 50s, and of 10s. And let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it'll be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. And so his father-in-law is saying to Moses, hey, listen, Moses, you've got to share the load, man. You've got to delegate out. You've got to empower other people. You simply cannot do this alone. But don't look for anybody. Don't look for anybody. Look for men of integrity. Look for men of character. Because, Moses, you're going to need to know this. If you want decision-making here, these settling disputes to lead to the good, to lead to order and harmony and beauty, you need honest men. You want leaders who their word matters. A lot of application of modern culture I'm just going to set aside right now. You need leaders whose word means something, who are honest, who aren't going to take a bribe, i.e. they're not looking out for themselves. They're not going to leverage their leadership position for their good. They're going to leverage it for your good. This is what you are to look for, because Moses, listen, both process and people matter. You want to settle this conflict in a way that leads to the good. Process matters. People matters. You got to bring those together. And when you bring those together, what's the result? Verse 23. And if you do this, God will direct you. You'll be able to endure. And all the people also will go to their place in peace. Here's the result. Result number one, Moses, you're not going to burn out, man. You're not going to go down in flames, Moses. You're going to be able to handle it. You and the people, you will be able to handle this. It won't be so great that you can't bear it. You will be able to endure. You'll be able to make it tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. But two, result two, the people will go and live in peace. The word peace here, it's the Hebrew word shalom. It's the word shalom. It's a word that we don't really have a good English translation for. It just means complete flourishing. I mean, complete and total human flourishing, physical flourishing, emotional flourishing, spiritual flourishing. Just complete and total flourishing. And the point is this, that the purpose of Moses sitting around judging right, wrong, good, bad, holy, it was to lead to flourishing. It was to lead to shalom. This is what Moses' father-in-law is saying when you've got conflict. Conflict, not good. You want flourishing. You need people and you need process. That's what's going to lead to shalom. And right after this, if you just put ourselves in their shoes, right after this, they're going to make their way to Sinai and they're going to get the Ten Commandments. And you're going to have Moses having been instructed. We've got the right people. We've got the right process. Now we've got very clear law that leads to flourishing. And now the table is set and we are ready to roll. We are ready for shalom to happen. But there's a problem. It never did. It never did. Now, if you follow the story of Israel isn't one where they went back to their homes, lived in peace, got the Ten Commandments, and then they just flourished. That is not the story of Israel. The story of Israel is one of infighting and war. It's one of worshiping other gods and exile. It's a story of disorder and chaos, dysfunction. And so we're left with this question, this honest intellectual question looking at the text. Why didn't this work? If chapter 18 is true, and we've got the Ten Commandments coming, why didn't it work? Why did it not lead to the results that Moses' father-in-law said it would lead to? And the answer is this. Moses' father-in-law was right. He was right. But there was a piece of the story he was missing. You see, Moses' father-in-law was right, that Moses was a teacher and a mediator. But what he didn't know was this. He didn't know that the story of Moses wasn't really about Moses. There's a place in John 5 where Jesus is teaching, and he says that if you believed Moses, you would have believed me, because he wrote of me. Moses, the story of Moses, what he wrote, which Exodus here, it was about me. I am the one that this is about. You see, what he got right was that Moses was a teacher. What he got wrong was that he wasn't the teacher. What he got right was he was a mediator, but he's not the mediator. The mediator was yet to come, and when Jesus did, as fully God and fully man, he brought perfect alignment between God and man. True and full eternal agreement between God and man. And when he did, he came and he lived the life that you should have lived, and he died the death that you should have died. He died the death that you should have died. And when he went to that cross, he experienced all the chaos and the disorder and the not good the world had to throw at him. And he was judged in your place and in mine, standing in the gap for you and for me. And then he was buried, and then 3 days later he walked out of the grave, and at one point his heart started beating again and blood started pumping again, and in that moment he judged death by his life. He judged it by its life. And he said, "Oh death, where is your victory? Where is your sting? Not here. Not here." And he is now seated at the right hand of the Father, and one day he will return to bring judgment on all the injustice of the world. And when he does, there will be no more tears, no more heartache, no more To steal the line, all that is sad will become untrue, and we will experience the shalom we have longed for. There will be shalom. It's just going to be when the judge returns. And Jesus is the perfect and eternal judge who on the cross was judged for you and for me in our place, who one day will return to judge all that is unjust and bring about the world that we have longed for and we have hoped for. And to the degree, Redeemer Georgetown, to the degree that animates us, animates us, gets deep inside and sinks into us, to the degree that shapes us, here's what's going to happen. One, judgment becomes something that we welcome, not something we're afraid of. And here's what I don't mean. I don't mean you're elitist, Brandon, you're terrible at softball, or I can't believe you wear shorts and loafers judgment. That's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is this. I need you to do for me what Moses did for them, to take the mind and the heart of God and apply it to my life. When you see areas of my life that are not in alignment with what God would call good, I need you to say something. But I don't need to be your opinion. I need to be, this is what God would say is good and flourishing, and this is what your life is looking like right now, and Brandon, we need to talk about it. I need you to do for me what Moses did for them. Why? Because I can't see myself clearly. I can't see me clearly, and you know what? You can't see yourself clearly either. You need one another. I need one another. When our life is not in alignment with what God calls good, chaos follows, not flourishing. We need one another. It's why gospel community is so incredibly important. And by gospel community, I mean both gospel community and gospel community. Let me explain. I mean both gospel community, the Wednesday night, the Tuesday night, the Thursday night, where you show up and we have a meal together and we pray together and we take what was taught and we apply it to one another communally together. I mean that. Like regular presence is part of life in community. But I also mean gospel community in the sense that we have a community formed by the gospel. Formed and shaped by the gospel. And that looks like a community with the courage to speak up. When we see something in one another that is not in alignment with what God would call good, we have the courage to say something and the humility to listen. That's a community formed by the gospel. My deeper issue of fear of failure, here's what I need from you. I'm just going to apply this to myself. I need you to speak to me in the language of the gospel. That's what I need. I don't need, bootstrap, fix it. It's all going to be okay. That just drives people deeper into fear. And I don't need pat answers, pop psychology that just don't ever get to the actual issue. I need the language of the gospel spoken into that. So do you. So do you. Second thing that happens, we stop compartmentalizing our life. Listen, some of us are living like this. We've got this thing in our life. We're ashamed of it. We don't want anybody to know about it. And we don't want to think about it because we're afraid of the feeling of judgment we're going to feel when we think about it. So we stick in a box over here. And then we got Jesus in a box over here. And these two boxes never come together. It's a compartmentalized life. If that's simply not how relationships work, and you know it. If Amanda and I have been married for 18 plus years. I did the math real fast. And if for 18 years Amanda had said to me, hey Brandon, what are you most ashamed of? And I looked at her and said, none of your business. How's that work? What kind of marriage does that lead to? Not a good one. Putting Jesus in a box and our shame in a box over here, or whatever we feel fear of feeling judgment and letting them not meet. That is not how relationships work. It's not how they grow closer. And what you need to know is that there is a courtroom scene like the one of Moses playing out right now. It's playing out in heaven right now, where whatever you are afraid of feeling, the judgment you might feel over it, Jesus is sitting before the Father and saying, yeah, they did that. Not sugarcoating it, they did it. Guilty. My blood covered it. My blood covered it. My blood covered it. And whatever that is in your life, from college, abortion, divorce, constant anxiety, insecurity, depression, fear. You pick yours. Jesus is not pretending like it's not real. He's looking at the Father and saying, my blood covered it. It's covered. And when you believe that, when you believe that Jesus stood on the cross, judged for you, you can let him into the painful parts of your life. Because the judgment that leads to condemnation happened to him. This is the one that leads to life and flourishing. And then third, when this animates us, when this shapes us, it gets deep inside of us, the third thing that happens is we focus more on ourselves than on our neighbors. 1 Corinthians 5 is this passage where Paul, the author, is writing in. He's talking about the scene where you've got a guy sleeping with his stepmom, father's wife is what it says. So this is not good. We can all agree this is not a good, healthy family dynamic at play. Paul says, I've already judged him. I pronounced judgment on him. Can't have someone saying, I love Jesus, sleeping with stepmom. At the end of the chapter, I'm going to paraphrase. This is what Paul says. He says, it's not my job to judge outsiders. It's people inside the church that you are to judge. God judges those outside. The principle is this, that when judging right, wrong, good, bad, we should focus on ourselves, not on everyone around us. Redeemer Georgetown. We have loved being a part of this community. You want to have a redemptive presence here in Georgetown? Like you want to have a redemptive presence here in the community that we have been placed in right here and right now? This is the way. Focus more on ourselves than everyone around us. Let our correction be more centered on us than everyone around us. This is the way to be a redemptive presence here. And I debated this. I actually called Robert and asked about it. But man, we have such an opportunity in this coming year to be a visible representation of the world everybody wants. 2016 was crazy. 2020, crazy. You know what 2024 is going to be? Crazy. It's going to be insane. And I don't want you to misunderstand anything I'm about to say. The ethics of Jesus matter. They are what's best for the world. Learning to apply the mind and heart of God to the world, it matters. There are serious problems that need serious solutions for the good, for the flourishing of our neighbors. But hear this. How we live as a community, Redeemer Georgetown, matters more than who our neighbor votes for. It matters more. We want to be a redemptive community right here, right now, in this city. This is the way. And again, do not hear me saying something I'm not saying. I'm not saying issues don't matter and who you vote for doesn't matter. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is a redemptive community is far more concerned with judging themselves than everyone around them. Far more concerns. We have such an opportunity in this coming year, Redeemer Georgetown, to embody the world that our neighbors are so desperately longing for. And it's why they're flaring up on Facebook day in and day out. Because they want that world. And Jesus came into the world to say, here it is. Here it is. I'm coming right now, and I'm coming to be judged for you. And then one day, I'm going to come back, and all that is unjust in the world, I'm going to be judged for that injustice. I'm going to bring an end to it. I'm going to judge that injustice. And I'm going to bring about the shalom. I'm going to bring about the flourish. I'm going to bring about the world that everyone is born longing for. And between those two times, I'm going to create this redeemed community called the church to embody the world that will be in the world that is. May this be us, Redeemer Georgetown. May this be us. Not afraid to take Jesus into the hard places of our life because we know he was judged for us. Not afraid of looking honestly within, knowing that the judgment of condemnation landed on him, not on us, because his blood covers it. Let's pray.